Well, let's go and start at the beginning of the book in 1 John chapter 1, verse 5. This is the message we have heard from Him and announced to you, that God is light, and in Him there is no darkness at all. Now, John uses darkness and light quite a bit. And it is proper to say that he is speaking about the holiness of God, the impeccability of God, the fact that God is without sin. There is no spot, there is no blemish, there is no shadow in His character. All His works are perfect and just. But I think there's something else going on here also. It's very important to see. What we know something about these false teachers, and they seem to be at least maybe the root of what later became Gnosticism. And it was a very esoteric religion, very dark. You never really knew where you stood, or you had to have all these secret ideas and thoughts, and you had to be initiated into the group to go up into higher and higher levels of knowledge. And so these simple believers would be concerned that they were nothing more than, well, immature spiritual creatures who had no chance of ever attaining such a high knowledge. But John comes and he says something very important to us. He says this: God is light. And I believe that this not only refers to the fact that God is holy, that God is without sin, but I believe there's a tinge of the idea of revelation here, that God is not a dark, esoteric God. He is not a hiding God from a seeking man, that God is light. He has made known Himself to men, especially through the person of Christ, that we know something about the nature and the works and the will of God. It is known. It's not hidden. And so he goes on and he says this: if we say we have fellowship with Him. Now, throughout this entire book, the meaning of this phrase, this type of terminology, if we say that we are Christian, if we say that we are children of God, if we say that we are born again, that's the idea here. He says, if we say that we have fellowship with Him and yet we walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. Now, the idea here is this: if we say that we are Christian and yet we live in darkness with regard to the revelation of God concerning His nature, His person, and His will, we're lying in our confession. If we say that we are Christian and yet we live in a manner that contradicts what God has revealed to us about His nature and His will, we are lying when we make that confession. Now, let's go on. I want us to see something else. He says, if we say that we have fellowship with Him and yet walk in darkness, peripateo. It's talking about, it's present tense, it's a continuous action. It's talking about a style of life. And believers, you must grasp this or you'll fall into a false condemnation. John is not talking about a perfect walking in the revelation of God, but he's talking about a style of life that when you look at an individual through the course of their profession of faith in Christ, you can see that there is an inclination, a tendency, a lifestyle of seeking and actually walking according to the revelation of God concerning His person and His will. Let me give you an example. If you follow me around with simply a snapshot camera, a digital camera, not anything that would shoot any form of video, but just a digital camera with a snapshot, and you followed me around, it wouldn't take long for you to find me in a moment of sin. Maybe I'm impatient, maybe I was short with someone, maybe I was lazy, something. You would be able all of a sudden to follow me around, and the moment that happened, you'd be able to take a snapshot, click, and then you could come here next year to this conference, put the picture on the wall, and say, look, I told you that Paul Washer was reprobate. I told you that he was unconverted. Look, here he is obviously not walking in the revelation of God's person and God's will. He's sinning. But see, that wouldn't be just. And it's most certainly not what John is talking about. But if you followed me around for several days, weeks, months, maybe even years, with a video camera going on continuously. You just followed me around. And then you were able to play that video in its entirety, you would have a better picture of what John is talking about. He's not saying that the true believer in Christ never steps outside of what God has revealed about Himself and His law. No, what he's saying is, when you look at the full course of the believer's life, you can see this tendency, and probably an ever-increasing tendency, to conform himself and his actions more and more to the nature and will of God. Now, my question for you is this: is that a reality in your life?